Nostalgia is such a beautiful thing, and I think the past year has really reminded a lot of people of how important that is in our lives, because when we're talking about revisiting older games, we're not even talking about the days of the NES and all of those very, very old consoles. Nostalgia for some people may be going back and reminiscing the days of when they first got their Nintendo 64 or their PlayStation 2. And in this video, we are going to be traveling back in time and talking about our first or favorite memories about the PlayStation 1, the PS2, and the PS3. Hey friends, Juan here, welcome back. Today we'll be talking about just that, reliving that past. When you think about going to GameStop or Electronic Boutique, you got that PS1. What was that memory like? Or even when you got the PS3, maybe that was your very first Blu-ray player. We'll be talking about all of those experiences, and I'm not going to be alone because once I share my respective memories, I have a couple of friends that are going to be doing just that. So without further ado, make sure to subscribe, give me that thumbs up, you go down to the comment section, my friends, and share those stories. And I mentioned PS1, the first thing that pops into my head are these lovely, beautiful demo discs. And if you grew up with the PS1, you know what I'm talking about. Toys R Us had them, even Pizza Hut. You could go to a Pizza Hut and get demo discs containing Crash Team Racing. And this is just one containing games like Tekken 3, Gran Turismo. But going back to when the PS1 came out, I will never forget it. It was my brother, one of his friends, and myself. We go to our home, and then in he pops in Battle Arena to Shinden. And then afterwards, we played, I think it was Destruction Derby. And I saw those 3D graphics because I had played fighting games on the Super Nintendo. Obviously, we're talking about, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, but games like Battle Arena to Shinden, Soul Edge, the first Tekken game, I was like, oh man, we're stepping into a whole new territory, because even though I was playing some PC games up until around this point, it wasn't up until you got this console that I really saw like, oh, games are going to evolve. With the Super Nintendo, I was used to very colorful graphics, right? It was more kid-oriented. And for context, I never owned a Sega console all the way up until the Sega Dreamcast. So for this point, I really was a PlayStation gamer. And then the other thing that I remembered was Twisted Metal. Oddly enough, those first PlayStation memories for me are about Destruction Derby, Twisted Metal, Ridge Racer, a lot of racing games, because I feel like that's one of the genres that they tried, right? We got those F-Zeros, we got the Super Mario Kart, but here you have the clown, you're blasting things up in the sky. And that's something that I really remembered to be very special about the PlayStation 1. Now, something that was not too great, and I know a lot of parents just despised, is memory cards, because with the Super Nintendo, you got the game and the save was within that. I remember my brother and I having to explain to my mother, like, okay, so we got the game, but the game doesn't store that information. And then our mother would get upset logically saying, well, on the Super Nintendo, that was not an issue. Yeah, but discs, the future of technology. And then she'd think it was maybe like $10, but then I think it was 40 or so. And she was just so upset. And I think a lot of people definitely relate to that. Some other games that come to mind when thinking about the PS1 are things like 2 Extreme, 3 Extreme, Jet Moto. These games were a testament of its time. And once again, validate my point with the whole like racing game, right? Because this is all about moving forward. Now, games like this had a 3D world with 2D sprites, and this is awful. Like, I played it recently a couple of years ago, and I was like, you know what? Maybe it's best we leave that in the past. But then one game that really blew my mind was WCW versus the World. I haven't had much of a chance to talk about wrestling games in this channel, but anytime that I do, or I can, I gotta put it out there, right? I'm a big wrestling fan. And wrestling games look, I know there's WrestleFest, there's the WrestleMania arcade game, which is okay, but this was the first time that I saw a wrestling game and thought to myself, there's potential here. To sum it up, my experiences and first memories with the PlayStation 1 really was about the graphics and the presentation and the music, because you would have games with like legitimate soundtracks, right? I remember somebody told me, hey, did you know you can plug in you can put in your PS1 game on a CD player and it would play music? And in some cases, it actually did. And I was like, man, this is really, really fancy stuff. So having said all of that, I really would love to know, what are some of your favorite PlayStation memories, the first ones? Let me know in the comments. And keep in mind, I didn't even talk about RPGs and all of that, because we can have 20 parts of this kind of video. So if you would just like more PlayStation memories as a whole, people, I think we can talk about this for a couple of years, right? But then moving over to the PS2, I think this is my favorite console. If I had to think about what is the most defining, significant video game console of all time for me, it really was the PS2, not just for the games that came with it, but also the backwards compatibility. And here, we're going to 2000, 2001. I'm officially a teenager, right? I'm officially more aware of the game genres that I liked. Up until this point, I kind of just play whatever, right? But here, I had a little bit more access to the internet. I have more knowledge about some of the games that came out. This was a big deal because when the PS2 came out, I was not able to buy it day one because economically, we did not have the money. So I got it must have been around July 2001 with the red box containing Gran Turismo 3. And that to me was awesome, right? Because I had talked about racing games, a recurring theme. That was one of the things that a lot of companies would obsess over. New generation racing games, or the hair in wrestling games, will be an indication of that progress. Now, I get the console, I bring it back home, and then I'm thinking to myself, well, it's okay. I'll just plug in the PS1 memory card and I'll be good to go, because I was flat broke. I only had just enough money to get the console with the game that came with it. And then I find out it doesn't work. I was not able to buy a PS2 memory card for about a month after I actually got the console, which means, people, that every single time, first of all, I did not shut down my PS2 for like that first week, because I would just lose the data and I would get it right back. And that led to me getting a lot of demos. Like one of my favorite demos and most memorable ones is this jam pack from 2001. This has Ico, Red Faction, Sword of Enders, Legacy of Kain. And recently, in the past 2 to 3 years, I've rekindled my love with demo discs, as you can see. So I'm actually going back and buying some of the stuff. But once I was able to get that memory card, I experienced a lot of different games, including Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. I didn't even cover or mention Tony Hawk in the PS1 part, but I mean, these games, the soundtrack, I think I owe the Tony Hawk's games and the wrestling games for the music that I love listening to this day. And this game was just amazing, a great evolution from the PS1 games, even though you could still get that on the PS1, but we don't talk about that. Obviously, 2001, we're talking about Final Fantasy X. I cannot believe how beautiful this game looked, and I think we undermine the significance of the visual style and graphics and presentation of this game, because I actually popped in this version. I know we have the remasters and all that stuff, but recently I popped in this game into my PS2, and I was looking at it like, what the hell? How did this look so good in 2001? When I think about the PS2, the first game that comes to mind as a whole is Metal Gear Solid 2, because we all witnessed that trailer, right? The opening cinematic and the bridge, and I was like, holy crap, comparing MGS2 graphics to the first game, MGS1, it's like, whoa, can you only imagine what's going to happen with the next generation? And that to me really meant a lot. Some of the other games that come to mind from like the early days of the PS2 is Frequency. So people talk about Rock Band, Guitar Hero, or maybe even Amplitude. But before that, we got this game right here. And it's one of those games that I basically just don't cover like music rhythm games in the channel, because it's just a friendly way of saying, hey, copyright strike, hey, YouTube, close my channel. So I don't really cover them too much, but I love the fact that in this game you had multiple rows and each row was a specific music instrument, right? It's still worth playing. It's got a great soundtrack. Amplitude, the sequel, is a lot better. And then eventually, we got some cool games with Rock Band and Guitar Hero, which I honestly miss playing, and I was going to mention Guitar Hero in my PS3 part, but now I'm just sad because I want to reobtain some of those controllers and the guitars and all that stuff. And people, those prices, my goodness, it's like $400 to $500 for a complete package. What? Two other games that I got to bring up, Ico. And I'm not even bringing this up now in the loving sense, right? In hindsight, I know how great this game is. I also have the HD edition on the PS3. but I remember I went to an electronic boutique in nearby Puerto Rico, which is where I used to live. And then I saw the box and I thought to myself, this has got to suck. I think it's maybe one of the most infamous game covers of all time because it's just a kid with this weird hat, and then he's got a stick, and there's like a girl in the back. Is she a ghost or something? Is this like Clock Tower? And a lot of people did not understand it. And I rented it, and as a kid, I really did not appreciate it. It wasn't up until years later when I would play Ico and Shadow back to back that I really fell in love with that game. And hey, we talked about a wrestling game on the PS1, WWF SmackDown. Just Bring It. I almost called it Shut Your Mouth, which is the one that came out afterwards. I was a little bit let down by it, not gonna lie, because those that played the SmackDown games on the PS1, you know that the entrances were not complete. They were cut off. And this game was no exception, even though it was a little bit better. Visually, I don't think it was that much of an improvement. It wasn't up until Here Comes the Pain that I really felt like this is the PlayStation 2 generation of wrestling games. And I think wrestling games on the PS2 are very underrated because compare the graphics of this game all the way to like SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. Anybody that didn't enjoy the PS2 generation may be thinking to themselves, those are two completely different generations of video games, but that was the same console. I don't know if that speaks to the developers not being great when the PS2 came out, or if it was just about untapped potential of the console. But the last thing we have got to talk about PS2 memories is DVD support. DVD players, at least in Puerto Rico, will be like, what, $300 or something? So the biggest reason and my justification with my mom as to why I was saving up for a PS2 is, yeah, I can play some of them video games, but I can also watch these movies. And we had a DVD player at home, and the first movie that I watched was The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. The problem is, DVD players back then, they would just skip discs like crazy, and that disc did not have a single scratch. So being able to get this and actually watch DVD movies meant that I could check out the wrestling DVDs. I could check out, shows like Futurama and Family Guy years later. But I truly did love. I felt like a big kid, man. Like now I can truly comprehend the quality differences between the VHS and the DVD. So before we get to the PS3, start piling up those PlayStation 2 memories. And kind of like the first part, if you'd like me to talk about this a little bit more, definitely let me know, because we could just make a video about 2000 and the year 2001. We could split that into like 10 parts, because this is when I really loved video games. I'm not saying that I don't anymore, but this is like the glory days for me. So now getting to the PS3, we're traveling to November 2006. And even though that was the month and the year that the console came out, I was not able to get it because, once again, much like the PS2, economically, I cannot afford it. And then we're talking about $600. I think we all remember that E3 with that PowerPoint presentation. That's maybe my first PS3 memory, if anything. You saw that price, and my first thought was, I'm never going to get that. Like, hey, that's cool, man. Those games look awesome, but that is way out there. And then we're having the conversation about Blu-ray. I did not have a Blu-ray player. I did not have an HD TV. And I was in that boat of like, well, how much better can these Blu-ray movies be, or HD DVDs? I already got me a DVD. I don't need that to be HD. I knew that eventually I would get a PS3, but I needed a high definition television, and younger Juan did not understand like what HD was all about. So what I got was this tube TV that was kind of like CRT/HD, and it did 1080i. And it was used, I got it for like $100 or something because there was a defect in the middle. It was like a small line, didn't really bother me too much. And I got that in preparation for the PS3. The first Blu-ray movies that I watched were Ratatouille and The Condemned, starring Stone Cold Steve Austin. So there's my wrestling reference for the PS3 part. But then the first game that really blew me away, and it's interesting that, for so many years I did not play racing games, but it seems to be a recurring theme here, is MotorStorm. When I saw the trailer for MotorStorm, that's when I knew, okay, this is not just another PlayStation console. This truly is an evolution of gaming, because to this day, even a lot of people that look at my gameplay videos for MotorStorm and Apocalypse, they will say, hey, these games look unbelievable. Like it is just outrageous how far ahead of their time they really were. So I remember getting this for $70 because when I got the console, this was when the PS3, everybody hated it. Even GameStop in Puerto Rico, they heavily promoted the 360 and the PS3 was like, that's the failed console for many years, right? It wasn't up until we got like the Slim, the Ultra Slim, that I feel like that changed towards the end. I went to I want to say over 10 GameStop and EB Games and they didn't have them. So I went to Plaza Las Americas in Puerto Rico and I got myself this copy. No, this is not the original one that I got, but the one that I got then, let's say hypothetically, this is kind of like it. It was $70 and I was like, what the hell? So not only did I just spend so much money getting this console, but then you're charging me $10 more just because you're a Sony store. I don't think those stores exist anymore, but that was a very big shock factor for me. And playing games like this, I played Super Rub-a-Dub, which I have a gameplay video on my Let's Play channel, PlayerJuan Plays, so you can check that out. I remember getting the console because I was a PlayStation gamer. I had an Xbox, an OG Xbox, but I wasn't attached to it, right? Here, I'm like, no, I believe in Sony. I believe in PlayStation. Why am I focusing on this and that? And then one of the games that I would wait for is this one right here, Rainbow Six Vegas. I kept checking out the GamePro magazines, and people will be saying, wow, this game is so good. And I was really into first-person shooters, which one that you got to talk about, very early into that 360 PS3 generation, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. An amazing game, still worth playing today. And it'll be worth playing forever. It's just freaking amazing. I would see the reviews for the 360 version of this game, and people would say it's incredible, it's unbelievable, you got to play it. And this one got delayed, and I was upset. It got delayed by about 4 or 5 months. Then the reviews start piling in, saying, this is not like the Xbox 360 version. This is worse. It is glitch-filled. And I'm sitting here with my crappy Tube HD 1080i TV, just like, I have made the wrong decision in my life. I get the game, and I will never forget this. So I go online, and people would say there was this glitch where if you played online, sometimes a gun would glitch and the sound would never stop. That happened to me like 3 seconds into my first match. I legit started crying because I think that's when I realized I made a mistake. Now, I had kept on playing a couple of PS2 games. I did get more games that I loved, but really my first PlayStation 3 memories are very negative because those first years were rough. As somebody that did not have an Xbox 360, I would look at Gears of War thinking, yeah, I messed up. So Rainbow Six had kind of like a cover system, but it was worse. It was a blurry mess. It is still a blurry mess. It just looks horrible now. And that right there is my first memory with the PlayStation 3. And I think that more so than any of the games, it's also a reminder that in hindsight, everybody's like, oh, the PS3, Xbox 360 was the high definition generation. Yeah, but most people did not have HD TVs. Most of the friends or people that I knew locally still were playing in their 4x3 televisions. Let's not forget that I believe the first Xbox 360s did not even have an HDMI output. They had component. So it's very interesting to see the evolution of consoles. And that's why when talking about the memories of PlayStation, I really did want to dedicate my time to these three. And before I get to my awesome friends, ask you directly, is there any specific year you would like me to talk about? Just like a conversation, right? Almost like a podcast here, because the conversation about an individual video game, like that's special. That's pretty awesome, right? But we forget about the accessories like the memory card adapter for the PS3. You could drag over your PS1 and PS2 memory cards over to the PS3. I bought that. I used it like maybe twice because after that, I didn't need it. I never threw it away. Now it's like one of the more expensive things. And the other memory is with a PS3 that I kind of just forgot now is it didn't come with Rumble support. So yeah, I'm going to say like those first 2 years, I felt really left out. And then my PS3 got a yellow light of death. I eventually got a 360 and I switched for a couple of years and then I got myself a refurbished PS3 Slim. But now that I've had a pretty lengthy time to talk about all of these things, I think you're really going to love a couple of my friends here that have a lot of great memories that really are just going to continue to refuel this nostalgic time machine. So without further ado, I'm going to start with my co-hosts from A Cast of the Past, starting with Keith Hamilton.
I didn't own a PlayStation until well into the 2000s. I was very much an N64 kid growing up. So, a lot of my earliest memories took place at friends' houses, checking out their games, most specifically that legendary demo disc, the one that had like Metal Gear Solid, Wild 9, Thrasher Skate and Destroy, and Spyro the Dragon on it. Spyro was my jam. I played that thing so much that I convinced myself that there was more to that demo disc than there actually was. Because once you get to the end of it, there's a guy with a balloon that says like, oh, if you come back this fall, there'll be more adventures to have, more places to explore. So I had convinced myself that if I let the game sit long enough, and this is on a friend's TV, mind you, so I apologize to their parents for their electricity bill, that the game would eventually turn into fall, and then I would be able to explore those things in the demo disc. Turns out, you just actually had to buy the game when it came out that fall. But hey, what did I know? I was a dumb kid. But yeah, playing the PlayStation at friends' houses, that turned me on to some of my favorite franchises ever. Things like Metal Gear Solid, which is #1 in my books. The Twisted Metal franchise, SmackDown. I bought all of those and went to friends' houses to play those. That's how good of a friend I was back in the day. A little better these days. Back then, not so much.
My first experience with the PlayStation honestly isn't one of those like significant memories that really kind of sticks out to me. The one thing that comes to mind was just going to a friend's house and playing Crash Bandicoot, and I remember being a little upset that I couldn't play that game for myself, but at the time I obviously didn't own a PlayStation, so what actually really compelled me to get one is not necessarily going to a friend's house to play it, but it was actually more so the commercials. Owning an N64, there was a lot of commercials for PlayStation games that weren't available on the system I had. So eventually when that list grew and grew and grew, it really compelled me to want to try all those games out.
The PlayStation came out when I was 10 years old, and I was already super into video games. During this time, video games were still very much looked at as something by the society and culture at large, as something that was just for nerdy kids. Sony, with the Sony PlayStation, they really kind of started to change that perception, I think. It was kind of the first time that things really started to shift. When PlayStation came out, it felt like they looked at Sega and said, oh, that's cool what y'all are doing, that's cute, appealing to the edgy little preteens and everything. But if you want to get a Sony PlayStation, you're gonna need to show us a driver's license. Kids thought that Sega and Nintendo were cool, but when the PlayStation came out, even your best friend's cool older brother who drove a car and smoked cigarettes, even he thought the PlayStation was cool. And I think Sony really ultimately delivered on that whole vibe with games like Final Fantasy and Metal Gear Solid. Like, those were very clearly not just games for kids. Those were games that people generally thought of as legitimate, cool games that were just as cool as the big, cool blockbuster movies that were coming out. I think the first games we ever played on the PlayStation was, the first one I remember playing for sure was Jumping Flash, from a friend who spent the night and brought his PlayStation over before we ever had one, and we were playing that game, and I thought it was really cool, very much unlike anything that I had ever seen on Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo or the NES. For sure. It took us about 1.5 years to save up enough money to buy one. Our mom bought us Jet Moto 2 and Armored Core for Christmas, but I was completely consumed by Armored Core when we got that game. Come to find out, that game was made by From Software, which is just, a unanimously heralded and highly regarded company these days. I honestly didn't even know that back then, that's who made that game. I found that out about 1 year ago. But I was like, well, makes sense, because that game was freaking amazing. So yeah, Sony PlayStation, not just for kids.
So for me, Juan, the biggest thing I remember about when I first fired up a PlayStation console was just the sense of awe and amazement. Because the first game I ever got to play on a PlayStation console was Mega Man Legends. And the thing that I loved and that kind of made me see what the future of potential games were open world, lots of voice acting, kind of deep story elements with a lot of RPG mechanics, and just this love of where I could see games going. And that awe is just, it's so hard to describe when you're 13. And that to me is what has made me love PlayStation. Is every iteration of a PlayStation is a sense of awe. What is it going to bring this time?
I think that after listening to everybody share some of their stories, a great overall memory from not just PlayStation, but the 90s and the early 2000s as a whole is visiting a friend's house to check out the other console, because maybe you had a Genesis or Saturn, N64, PS1, PS2, and you wanted to check out the other console. You would go over to your friend's house, and if it wasn't for that word of mouth, we wouldn't get that. Now, even by the time the PS3 rolled out, that was very different because it was so defined, right? You were either a 360 gamer or a PS3 gamer. You had game FAQs, you had so many different websites, you had online videos, not YouTube up until that point, but the information was out there. Plus you could text a friend, you could chat with them up on MSN, and I think that part of video game culture and pop culture as a whole became a lot more normal, to the point that when the PS4 came out, you would have so much information, right? And the PS5, I mean, let's not even get to that conversation too heavily, because it's just, it is a social expectation that you would not go over to a friend's house to check out some information. And the topic of demo discs has completely disappeared. Now, maybe you get that with the VR kits or something like that, but it's truly interesting, and that's why I wanted to have a lengthier, different video talking about those stories, not just from my perspective, but from the perspective of my friends, because I know that as you continued watching this, you're thinking of like many different things you maybe completely forgot about. So if you want to support or check out any of their content, the information was on the lower third. It's also going to be available on the description of this video. And if you like what I do, make sure to subscribe, click on that bell, and up until next time, you can check out other videos like Super Rub-a-Dub, some PlayStation 1, PS2, PS3 gameplay videos are available on my Let's Play channel. I'm having a lot of fun there. And one of my overall goals there is to almost have like an almost people, because there's a lot of games, right? But have a pretty beefy library that if you ever just want me to talk about an individual game that maybe I don't have a full review available here, well, here's a 15 to 30 minute video talking about the game and giving my live experience. So up until next time, thank you for watching, supporting, and take care, everybody.